Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in Java programming series in 2025. And in today's video, we'll be talking about multidimensional arrays in Java. In our last video, we discussed about single dimensional array or 1D array where we created arrays, we initialized some values, and then we also learned how to access, and we also did a couple of operations. Um, and in today's video, we'll be talking about multidimensional array or matrix. So let me show what is multidimensional array. So it's also an array, but with multiple dimensions. That means we can have like different number of rows and columns, right? Because in one dimensional array, we would have we only have this row, right? Only one row. Even though we have multiple columns, we really don't care about it because we are not dealing with multiple rows. So that makes not much difference, right? But here, since we have two rows, for example, we can have three rows, four rows, five rows, right? As many rows as we want. But here, let's say we have two squares to represent. So whenever we want to access, replace, or whatever, or even creation, it will take two squares. That means we'll be defining how many number of rows here and then how many number of columns. For example, the order of this matrix is we have two rows and then three columns, right? That means we will be representing this array, this exact array or matrix, we can say, as 2 by 3, right, when we create. And when we also want to access something, we'll be accessing with row. For first of all, we'll be locating row. For example, if I want this value, we'll be locating this row. What is this row? Because the indexing always starts with 0, so this is going to be 0th row, and this is first row, and if we have more, it is second, third, and so on. And then the column, it also starts with 0 and then 1 and 2. For example, if I want this value, what I want is this is first row, that means 1. And the what is this column? This is 0, right? That means square bracket 1 square bracket 0 is going to be this box. And if we want more, for example, this is 1 1, and this is one row and second column, right? This is how we access. And if we also want to update values, we'll be doing that. And look at this, this index, for example, if you remove this one and access only one, this is itself is going to be a single dimensional array, right? So this row itself is an array, and this column, we technically don't call it, but it's also going to be an array, right? So this can be an array, right? This can be an array. It's just like it depends how you manage to program. But these rows and columns, they can be an array, right? So let me go to IDE and create the exact same version, and you will understand how this exactly works. So I'm going to be creating a new file, and I'll be creating a compact file, but you can go with Java class and just write main method. That's all. Everything else is going to be same. But if you want to get started with compact file, you need to use Java 25. It's not available in the version prior to 25. All right. So multi, for example, dimensional array, and this is where we'll be writing all of the codes related to multidimensional array. All right. And let's say I want to represent a matrix with the same name, and the number of rows 2 and columns 3, I'll be doing integer. Since I'll be storing only integer value, we can write character, string, and so on, integer. And then since it is multi-dimensional, we need to give two square bracket, and then of course the name of this array. So let me go and give it as matrix equals to new, and then it is going to be integer again, and instead of single bracket we'll be writing two brackets, right? But here is an error because we haven't defined the size of the array, right? So we have two rows and three columns, right? And this is how we create multi-dimensional array. And if we go here, so for example, we have certain values here, right? And if you want to check what values are in, so if I print it, sorry, if I print it, it is not going to work. And let me run this. Look at this. This is because this is just printing the reference to the memory location. So this is not the actual value. So either we have to work it differently, but we do have some built-in methods. So because I wanted to show that when we create integer array and don't assign anything, just define it, or only create it, we will have default values, right? And these default values are going to be 0 in case of integer and null in case of string, and so on, right? For example, if you are creating boolean array, it's going to be false. So what I'm going to do is, there is an important method called arrays. Okay, I'm going to be printing and this duplicating, command control D or command D, and then arrays dot deep, and then to string, right? This is built-in method available. And if I print matrix, so that means I'm passing deep to string. And then if I run it again, now you will see 0 0 in all places, right? This is just like a helper method that prints what is inside of the array, whether single or multidimensional. All right. So, and if you want to calculate how many rows are there, sometimes you want to traverse all the rows, or you want to get all of the rows, right? And then iterate over the rows and find it. So how can we do that? Since we have two rows, if we do integer number of rows equals to matrix and then dot length. So if we do this and print, sorry, I dot print ln number of rows equals to, and then number of rows. All right, and if I print it, it is going to give us 2, which is correct because we have 2 rows. So one of the important things that you have to keep in mind is, when you do matrix length, it keeps number of rows, not number of elements, or how much length does this array have in single dimensional array, right? Here it's just like the number of rows. That's a key difference. And if you want to find how many columns, for example, we have 3, then you have to do differently, right? You have to use, for example, if you want to define, you define, sorry, access the number of columns, number of, and then calls equals to matrix of 0 first row dot length, right? This gives the number of columns. Number of columns. All right, you might say why this works. It is because in array, for example, you cannot have an array with, for example, 1 2 3 here and 4 5 here. That would be invalid. So if this row has 3 elements, these 3 columns, this is also going to have, but we could have different number of rows, right? That's why matrix dot length gives the number of rows and not the number of columns, right? This is a design principle. So for example, now we also have a different ways. For example, what I can do is matrix, and then like I said, we can access, for example, if you want to 0, and if you want to access initialize some value, what you can do is 0, for example, in 0th position, if you want to initialize exact this value, we'll be doing 0 0 as 1. So what I can do is 0 0 as 1 and 2 and 3. All right, so it's the 0th row but first column, and here this is going to be 3 and 3. All right, so and if I duplicate all of these using control D, And since this is going to be second row, so we'll be starting with row 1 and column 0, 1, 2. All right. So it's 0, sorry, it should be 2, 0, 1, and 2. And also 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2, and 1, 1, and 1. All right. And now if I print the same thing, we should have value here. All right. Let me run this and look at this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it should be 4, 5, 6. All right. Let me run this. We should have 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. Look at this, right? But it is something that if you want to programmatically access, but if you are already known of the elements at the time of creation, you don't even need to do it, right? So what I can do is I'll be duplicating this line as well, and instead of naming it as matrix, I'm going to be saying it matrix 1. And what you can do is you can keep curly bracket, and this is the whole matrix. And if you have a number of rows, for example here 1 and 2 and 3, this is going to be first row, and this is going to be second row, right? And this is how we also did in single dimensional array. Then because the compiler already knows that the size of the array, we are not required to give it like integer and then, for example, integer. I mean, we can technically give it, but it's not required, right? um, so, and if I print matrix 1 also, it will give us the same value. Look at this, these are same, right? So let me see how to update some of the values. Let's say I wanted to give this matrix 1, I wanted to update its one of the values. And so if I want 1 and then 1 position equals 100, I wanted to keep that and just print it. And look at this, we have got 100 at 1 position. And when you want to print something, we have to use loop, right? So because this is, we'll be iterating through row and then grabbing the value at a particular column, right? So, and since we have multi-dimensional, so we'll be dealing with row, and then one of the loops will be dealing with rows, and one of the loops is going to be dealing with columns, right? So let me write a loop. So for integer I equals 0, I less than, let's loop through matrix 1 dot length and I plus plus, right? So this loop, this is for we can say rows, right? This tracks row. For example, when the I is 0, it's 0 row, and this tracks j equals 0, j less than matrix 1 dot length and j plus plus. And if I want io.println, and if I want to print all of the elements here, so what I can do is I can say matrix 1 of I, right? And then say, that means, okay, for 0, it will be printing every column values, right? And then it will be let me write, instead of println, I'll be writing print because it will print in the same line with some space. Okay. And after I finish printing the first row, I'll be writing a new line. All right. That means go to the new line. Otherwise, it will print even the second row in the same column. All right. Let me run this. Look at this. Okay, I'll be writing, this is for rows, and um, this is for column. Okay, and I can also write printing io dot print ln, this printing Okay, and let me run this. Printing matrix, and what we have 1, 2, 4, and 10, right? So where do we go wrong? So I made a small mistake here. What I did is I did matrix 1 dot length. Since we have two number of rows but three number of columns, so this logic is not correct. So if you want to calculate it correctly, it has to be that row dot length, or we can also say integer col and then number equals to matrix 1 of 0 and then dot length, right? So we can do either way, whether we can write here I dot length, because every row has the same number of columns, right? Otherwise the matrix would not be valid. And if I print it, it perfectly works. 1, 2, 3, 406, right? So, and if you also replace this with column number, it will also work as expected. And if you want to calculate, let's say, the sum of the elements of the matrix, we can define a simple variable. And if you want to define a variable, you can either proceed with var sum, and this bar is a little bit of new syntax. For example, if you do var sum and leave it like this, it is not going to work, because this bar only works inside the method. And if you don't initialize value, it's going to be a compile time error. Otherwise, you can initialize the value, for example this, and the compiler will always infer this value. So since I initialize 0, the sum is going to be an integer, and if I do 0.9, for example, it is going to be double, right? So I'm going to be going with sum 0, that means default value, and then sum. Every time I get the element, what I'm going to do is sum equals sum plus and this exact value. So that means matrix 1 of row, the row is represented by I, so it has to be I, and then the column is represented by Z, which is going to be Z, right? And finally, when we come out of the loop, because we want to print sum only once, we have to print it outside the loop. Sum of the elements in the matrix is going to be sum, right? And if I print it, that is going to give us 116, and let's verify if it is correct or not. So we have 106, and this 4 going to be 10, and 3 to 5 plus 1 6, so 110 plus 6 is going to be 116. That is perfectly valid. So I believe that is pretty much it for the metrics to get it started. If you want to play with more metrics concept, you can create a matrix of different size, and you can also initialize and access values and do some more operations. You can dynamically modify value and things like that. And if you have any questions about metrics, please comment down, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.